gods than the world was allowed to remember. Some cultures tried to preserve their memory. Most failed. A few died trying. Those who succeeded hid their names so deeply that only in recent centuries have archaeologists begun to sense the scale of the purge. But those ancient chroniclers left behind something they knew could one day be used to restore the truth. A warning, a prophecy, a promise. When the order weakens, the erased ones return. Not because they seek revenge, not because they seek dominion, but because humanity is no longer held by the structures that once replaced them. When an age collapses, its forbidden gods awaken, not as physical beings, but as ideas, archetypes, forces of consciousness that refuse to stay buried. They return through dreams, through symbols, through the cracks in the myths that no longer hold, and through the questions that rise when the world begins to sense that its version of heaven is incomplete. Tonight, we stand at the edge of a cosmic truth that ancient civilizations tried to preserve even as priesthoods tried to destroy it. Tonight, we open the first gate of the celestial rebellion, and beyond that gate lies the truth humanity forgot. The lost gods are not dead, they were erased, and now their story returns. Part 2, when the world worshipped different gods. Before the sky was divided into familiar pantheons, before myth was cataloged into tidy stories taught to children, before empires claimed the right to define which gods were real and which were monsters, the world was a far stranger place. There was a time, older than Egypt, older than Sumer, older even than the first inscriptions on clay, when humanity bowed before beings whose names have been stolen from the memory of the earth itself. Their temples did not resemble the stone structures that we excavate today. Their altars were not made of marble, nor gold, nor any material that could survive the erosion of time. Their sanctuaries were the storms, the mountains, the caverns where light refused to enter, the rivers whose currents seemed to speak a language no mouth could form. These gods were not metaphors, they were not symbols, they were not moral constructs created to teach obedience or fear. They were presences, beings that moved through the world as naturally as fire, wind, or memory. And for thousands of years, humanity lived not beneath them, but among them. In those early ages, there was no single pantheon, no unified myth, no cosmic hierarchy that elevated one group of gods above all others. Divinity was decentralized, fluid, wild. A river god in the east could be older than a sky god in the west. A serpent deity in Mesoamerica could share traits with a stormbringer in Africa, not because cultures borrowed from one another, but because the beings themselves were not confined to the borders humans would later draw. Back then, the divine was not limited to 12 Olympians, 7 archangels, 9 muses, or any sacred number invented to contain infinity. Humanity worshipped hundreds of gods, some radiant, some terrifying, some benevolent, some indifferent, and some so powerful that early priesthoods dared not record their names for fear that writing them would summon their attention. We see hints of this forgotten age in the fragments left behind. A stone carving that depicts a deity with wings on only one side of the body. A tablet describing a god whose realm was not heaven or earth, but the place before memory. A mural in which a human figure offers blood not from sacrifice, but from their own palm. A covenant, not a demand. And most puzzling of all, across continents that never touched, across cultures that never met, the gods of this era shared the same features, not in form, but in function. They were creators, destroyers, teachers, rebels, liberators. They uplifted humanity, and for that reason, they were doomed. When we explore this pre-Pantheon world, the first truth becomes clear. Humanity once lived in a cosmos where divine power was plural, unbounded, and uncontrollable. No single god ruled, no single order dictated the heavens, no priesthood monopolized the story. This freedom terrified those who later sought power, because a world with many gods cannot be ruled by a single king. A world with many sacred truths cannot be governed by one doctrine. A world where gods walk freely cannot be bent into submission. And so, as early civilizations grew, as cities became states and states became empires, a new idea rose. The sky must be organized, and only one group of gods may remain. This was not revelation, it was strategy. The moment human authority merged with divine narrative, the war for the heavens began. Not a war fought in the sky, at least not yet, but a war fought in the minds of men, a war of stories, a war of beliefs, a war of erasure. Imagine standing in a world where different regions worshipped different gods, not as rival cults, but as parallel branches of the same cosmic ecosystem. A storm god in one land was not superior to a serpent healer in another. A mother deity was not diminished by the existence of a warrior god. But as priesthoods gained influence, they discovered a powerful truth. Controlling which gods people worshipped meant controlling the people themselves. To rule a nation, you do not need to defeat its armies. You only need to rewrite the heavens in a way that suits your throne. And so, rising empires began to choose favorites. Some gods were elevated, others demoted, and many, far too many, were erased entirely. The plural world shrank into a curated pantheon, then into a myth, then into a doctrine, then into the narrow sliver of divine story we are permitted to know today. But what happened to the gods that did not survive this reordering? Why were they erased instead of integrated? Because these were the gods that encouraged humanity to think, to challenge, to question, to ascend. They did not grant kings the right to rule. They did not reinforce social hierarchy. They did not create a neat universe where divinity flowed downward through priests and upward through offerings. Their power did not depend on worship. Their presence did not depend on temples. Their wisdom did not require permission. In short, they could not be controlled. And so the world built prisons of forgetting around them. Not physical prisons, prisons of silence, prisons of absence, prisons that turned the gods themselves into ghosts, then legends, then nothing. A deletion so perfect that modern religions never even acknowledge that something is missing. But the stones remember, the ruins remember, and deep in the collective unconscious of humanity, the memory of these beings presses against the surface, like something long buried that has begun to breathe again. To understand this series, to understand the rebellion that is coming, we must first understand this. The world we know today is not the world our ancestors lived in. It is the world constructed from the ashes of a celestial purge, a world in which the most powerful gods were replaced, rewritten, or erased. A world built on the ruins of a forgotten divine age. And if we follow the trail of what was erased, tracing it through broken myths and scattered symbols, we begin to see its outline clearly. There was once a pantheon without borders, authority without hierarchy, a cosmos where the divine did not belong to rulers, but to all who dared to seek. And that cosmos did not vanish. It was taken. But what has been taken can be restored, and what has been erased can return. Part 3. The Erasure, the first rewrite of heaven. There is a moment in human history, not marked by war, not carved into monuments, not recorded in any surviving chronicle, when the sky itself was rewritten. A moment when the divine map that guided humanity for millennia was scraped clean, lines rearranged, names removed, realms reassigned. A celestial coup. The first rewrite. not the fall of a pantheon, but the deliberate restructuring of the entire cosmos. It is the single most important event that no school, no scripture, no tradition dares to mention. Yet its fingerprints are everywhere, in the sudden disappearance of hundreds of gods, in the emergence of official pantheons that appear suspiciously polished, in the contradictions between the oldest inscriptions and the later versions of the same myths, in the motifs of war, rebellion, and exile that echo like distant thunder across every ancient culture. To understand the celestial rebellion, we must return to the dawn of this silence, the moment the heavens were first edited. The earliest clue lies in Sumer, in a fragment written by a priest whose name has been lost but whose warning survived. Not all the gods who shaped the world were permitted to remain in the sky. A strange sentence, not poetic, not reverent, matter of fact, almost administrative, as though the heavens were being reorganized by decree. According to the fragment, the gods of the primordial world were too numerous, too wild, too independent. They taught forbidden knowledge, they defied cosmic hierarchy, they empowered humanity in ways that threatened both divine authority and the earthly rulers who depended on its endorsement. So a decision was made. The sky must be tamed, the divine order must be simplified, and the ancient gods, those who carried secrets older than civilization itself, must be removed. Not destroyed, erased. For destruction leaves traces, erasure leaves nothing. The priests who orchestrated this cosmic purge were not acting alone. The myths, when read honestly, point to a much deeper conflict, a rebellion among the gods themselves. Older gods refusing to surrender their autonomy, younger gods determined to centralize power, cosmic forces aligning behind ideologies of order and chaos. The first rewrite was not a human invention. It was a treaty after a war in heaven, a treaty that required the disappearance of every deity who might challenge the new celestial regime. These deities were not villains, they were simply incompatible with a universe ruled by a single hierarchy. In the new order, gods needed clear roles, clear domains, clear chains of command. The lost gods did not obey such boundaries. They crossed realms, crossed functions, crossed metaphysical laws that would later become sacred. Their power was too fluid to be contained, and so the purge began. One by one, their names vanished from inscriptions. Entire lines of myth were chipped away from tablets. Symbols associated with them were overwritten with new meanings. In some cases, the deities were rewritten into lesser spirits, demons, monsters, or metaphors. The most dangerous gods were not rebranded, they were removed completely. This is why the oldest mythologies feel incomplete, like stories missing their prologue, because they are missing their prologue. What we call ancient myth is not the beginning of the story, it is what survived after the great celestial censorship. A censorship so total that humanity forgot it had ever forgotten anything at all. Evidence of the first rewrite appears in the strangest places. A ritual chamber in Egypt dedicated to a deity whose name was meticulously scraped off every wall. A Persian hymn that speaks of beings too bright for the world to remember. A Hittite inscription describing a war among gods and ending abruptly with the line, "From this day the count of the heavens shall be 12." And across the world, cultures that never met tell eerily similar stories of divine beings cast out, not for crimes, but for refusing to submit to the newly established order. The recurring motif is chilling in its uniformity. The new gods did not defeat the old ones, they erased them. And by erasing them, they reshaped the cosmos into a hierarchy that reflected their authority. The first rewrite was the moment the heavens bent to political will, the moment divinity became standardized, regulated, obedient. It was the victory of order over mystery, of hierarchy over freedom, of sanctioned gods over the cosmic wild. The consequences on earth were immediate and profound. Priesthoods took control of divine narrative. Kings claimed descent from the approved pantheons. Scriptures solidified. Myths stiffened into dogma. The whisper of older truths grew quiet, and humanity was cut off from the beings that once guided our evolution. The gods of knowledge, creativity, chaos as creation, and spiritual autonomy were silenced. Their temples fell, their symbols were outlawed, their stories were rewritten to make them look monstrous, rebellious, corrupt, or irrelevant. But the most revealing detail comes from a late Babylonian commentary scribbled in the margins of a prayer tablet. "We have not destroyed them, we have hidden them." And beneath it, in fainter script, "They will return when memory fractures and the order weakens." This is the truth behind the first rewrite. Humanity did not forget the lost gods. Humanity was made to forget. And anything erased by force still exists in shadow, still breathes, still waits, still watches the heavens for the moment when the order that replaced them begins to crack. The series we begin today does not reconstruct mythology, it restores it. It does not tell the story of the gods we inherited, it tells the story of the gods we lost. The gods erased by fear, erased by war, erased by the rise of a celestial regime that believed the sky itself should belong to the few. But the sky was never meant to be owned, and the first rewrite is not the end of that story. It is only the beginning of the rebellion to come. Part 4. The Forbidden Pantheon. Gods Too Dangerous to Remember. There is a pattern woven through the ruins of the ancient world. A pattern so consistent, so deliberate, that once seen, it becomes impossible to unsee. Across continents that never met, across civilizations separated by oceans, deserts, and millennia, the same strange absence exists. The gods who vanish from history are never the weak ones. They are never the lesser spirits, the regional guardians, the minor deities whose influence faded naturally with time. No, the ones erased are always the same kind, the most powerful, the most transformative, the most dangerous to the cosmic order that replaced them. They are the gods who did not fit neatly into the hierarchy the new pantheons tried to impose, the ones who refused to kneel, the ones who taught humanity to stand, and above all, the ones who embodied forces too vast, too primal, too unbounded to be governed. These were not simply forgotten gods, they were forbidden gods. The pantheon humanity was not allowed to remember. To understand why these deities were erased, we must understand what they represented. In every ancient culture, there existed gods who did not rule through fear or obedience. They ruled through transformation. Their presence did not require temples. Their power did not depend on sacrifices. Their influence flowed not from thrones of heaven, but from the raw, untamed energies that shaped existence itself. These were gods of beginnings, gods of endings, gods of thresholds, of mysteries, of the kind of knowledge that dissolves the boundaries between mortal and divine. They were creators who did not need permission, destroyers who were not bound by moral order, teachers who offered wisdom dangerous enough to free entire civilizations from the systems that controlled them. To priesthoods and kings, these gods were a nightmare. To the new heavenly regimes, they were a threat. For any being who grants humanity the ability to think, to question, to ascend, is a being incompatible with centralized power. And so they were struck from the cosmic record, not because they were evil, not because they were defeated, but because their existence itself was a rebellion. In the myths that survived censorship, their shadows remained. A serpent coiled at the base of a world tree, not as an enemy, but as a keeper of knowledge older than the gods above. A winged figure carrying a tablet of secrets, later demonized for sharing those secrets too freely. A goddess of the deep, whose breath formed creation, whose name was later replaced with a sanitized echo that preserved only her gentlest qualities. A luminous being who walked among mortals and spoke in riddles about the nature of consciousness itself. Their presence survived where it could, disguised in metaphor, buried in folklore, hidden in symbols that lost their meaning only because we forgot to ask the right questions. These fragments are not coincidences, they are survivors, remnants of a pantheon too dangerous to fit the narrative the new gods enforced. Why were these beings so dangerous? Not because they sought domination, not because they brought chaos, not because they waged war against the heavens. They were dangerous because they made humanity sovereign. They taught early humans how to read the stars without needing divine intermediaries, how to heal without invoking the names of sanctioned deities, how to shape reality through the force of consciousness and will. They revealed secrets the new celestial order wanted hidden, that divinity is not something separate from humanity, that the boundary between mortal and God is thinner than priesthoods dared admit, that the universe is not ruled by one hierarchy, but woven by countless forces in constant negotiation. Such knowledge was intolerable to any regime, divine or human, that sought control. And so the forbidden gods were not merely erased, they were inverted. Some were rewritten as demons, some as tricksters, some as primordial threats to cosmic order. Some were given death narratives that contradicted the oldest myths. And some, the most powerful of all, were not rewritten at all. They were made to disappear, because even their distorted forms risked awakening questions the new order could not answer. In the ruins of Ugarit, a scholar deciphered a set of glyphs that historians tried to dismiss as poetic exaggeration. It read, "The gods whose names you no longer speak were not destroyed. Their silence was decreed." A decree, not a battle, not a punishment from the heavens, a cosmic administrative order, as though someone or something decided which gods humanity was permitted to remember and which gods humanity must forget. This is the essence of the Forbidden Pantheon, beings who carried truths that threatened the celestial hierarchy, beings who operated outside the chain of divine command, beings who empowered humanity in ways considered unacceptable in the new cosmic order, beings who would not kneel to the very gods who claimed sovereignty over heaven itself. These were the first rebels. Not rebels against creation, rebels against the rewrite. Their power was not extinguished, it was sealed. Their memory was not erased, it was buried. Their return was not prevented, only delayed, until the day when the order they opposed begins to fracture. And this is why the Forbidden Pantheon matters now. For we are living in a time when myths are being re-examined, stories are being questioned, and the version of heaven we inherited is revealing its missing pieces. Across the world, symbols associated with the erased gods resurface in dreams, art, rituals, and unexplained flashes of ancient familiarity. People feel drawn to forces they cannot name, to archetypes never taught to them, to gods whose stories they were never allowed to hear. This is the signature of a returning memory, a memory the ancients warned could not remain sealed forever. And so we stand at the threshold of a realization too vast to ignore. The Forbidden Pantheon was never defeated, it was hidden. But the seal is thinning, the silence is breaking, and the gods too dangerous to remember are stirring. Their return is not a prophecy, it is an inevitability, because nothing powerful ever stays erased.
Part 5, The Celestial Rebellion, the war behind the erasure. Before the priesthoods rewrote the heavens, before the pantheons we memorized in school were canonized as the only ones that mattered, before the old gods were buried beneath millennia of sanctioned myths, there was a war. Not a war of nations, not a war of mortals, a war so vast that no surviving myth dares to name it plainly: the Celestial Rebellion. The true origin behind every story of fallen angels, banished titans, demonic serpents, and forgotten creators. It is the war that the first rewrite tried to erase, because if humanity ever learned why the heavens fractured, the entire architecture of divine authority would collapse. But the fragments remain. They whisper of a time when the cosmos was not ruled by a single order, nor divided into neat families of gods, but governed by countless forces whose interactions shaped creation itself. This balance was delicate, dynamic, alive, and it was shattered, not by evil, not by chaos, but something far more human: ambition. Imagine the earliest age of gods, beings of colossal power who did not sit on thrones or issue commandments from immaculate heavens. They moved, they explored, they created freely, without hierarchy and without fear. Each embodied a facet of existence that later mythologies tried desperately to confine. One god was storm and silence, one was knowledge and flame, one was serpent and healing, one was darkness and birth. One was the river that remembered every name ever spoken into the world. They were not rulers, they were origins. But when creation stabilized, when the cosmos found rhythm and the first civilizations rose, a different kind of god emerged: a god of order. A god who believed the universe required structure, law, and command, not to preserve creation, but to control it. This being, or perhaps this faction, saw the wild autonomy of the primordial gods as a threat to the new age they envisioned. For the old gods did not answer to anyone, they did not kneel, they did not acknowledge a singular hierarchy. They believed the universe was too vast for one chain of authority. But the new gods believed otherwise, and so the conflict began. Order against freedom, dominion against autonomy, a celestial empire against a celestial wilderness. The war that followed was not fought with weapons as humans understand them. It was fought with essence, with light and shadow, with memory and unmaking, with the laws of reality themselves. The sky shook, the realms fractured, and when the dust settled, the victors wrote the only story the world was allowed to hear. This is why nearly every ancient mythology contains faint echoes of the same narrative. The Titans falling to the Olympians, the Asuras falling to the Devas, the Watchers falling to the Archangels, the Primordials falling to the younger gods, the serpent slain by the hero, the Ancient One defeated by the new king. Over and over, in culture after culture, the same archetype repeats: a cosmic regime change disguised as divine victory. But victory is only half the truth. The other half is what came after: the purge, the erasure, the rewriting of the heavens to conceal the rebellion that nearly reshaped creation. The new gods did not destroy their rivals. They could not. The primordial ones were too old, too embedded in the architecture of existence, too vast to be killed. So they were exiled, locked away, buried under myth and memory and silence. And the priesthoods of the new age became the guardians of that silence, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. For if humanity remembered the gods who taught freedom, the gods who whispered that mortals could rise beyond limitation, that divinity was not a birthright, but a state of consciousness, then no priesthood could rule, no king could claim divine mandate, no cosmic hierarchy could justify its supremacy. The Celestial Rebellion was not just a war among gods, it was a war for the soul of humanity. But the erasure did not hold. Whispers lingered in the cracks of rewritten scripture. Symbols the new pantheons tried to banish resurfaced in folk art and secret rites. Children in remote villages dreamed of gods whose names they were never taught. The forbidden ones never stopped breathing, and the victors never stopped fearing their return, because even in silence, power endures. The new order knew that suppression was temporary. The old gods were not truly gone. They were sealed behind fragile boundaries, boundaries that weaken whenever the world enters a time of transition. And we, right now, are in such a time. The myths are stirring, the boundaries thinning, the ancient motifs re-emerging across art, media, and dream. The rebellion did not end in the heavens. It merely shifted into the realm of memory, and memory is waking up.
This is the truth. The new series will explore the lost gods did not vanish. The forbidden pantheon did not fall. The celestial rebellion did not end. It continues. Wherever humans begin to question the version of heaven they were instructed to believe. And as we pull back the veil of the first rewrite, we will uncover the deeper conflict that shaped the cosmos. A war not of good versus evil, but of control versus freedom. A war not yet finished, a war in which humanity has always been the greatest prize. The gods erased from myth have not ceased to exist. They have simply been waiting for the moment the world becomes unstable enough to hear their voices again, waiting for the moment their return is not only possible, but inevitable. And that moment, if the ancients are to be believed, is approaching. The rebellion left unfinished is about to awaken. Part 6. Why the ancient priesthood hid the truth. Every cosmic war leaves ruins. But the ruins left by the celestial rebellion were not broken temples, shattered idols, or scorched landscapes. The true ruins were human. For when the new gods seized the heavens, when the celestial hierarchy solidified, the fate of the forbidden pantheon fell not into the hands of divine armies, but into the hands of a far more fragile, yet far more dangerous force: priesthood. It was not the gods who completed the erasure, it was the men who served them. And the motivations behind that service were not purely spiritual. They were political, psychological, territorial, terrifyingly human. To understand why the truth was buried, we must understand the oldest and most persistent fear that has ever haunted the ruling class: the fear of a world that does not need them. In the earliest cities, before kings existed, before the first dynasties claimed their bloodline descended from heaven, control over the divine was the greatest source of power imaginable. To define the gods was to define reality. To speak for the gods was to command obedience. To gatekeep the gods was to rule. But the primordial deities, the ones erased from history, did not allow themselves to be interpreted, restricted, or monopolized. Their teachings did not reinforce hierarchy, they dissolved it. They did not elevate kings, they empowered individuals. They did not demand submission, they taught autonomy. Imagine for a moment a God who whispers to humanity, "You do not need a mediator. You do not need permission. You do not need a throne to reach the divine." To priesthoods, this was not revelation, it was treason, a direct threat to the structures they had built, brick by brick, lie by lie, scripture by scripture. Because a population that learns to speak to the divine directly cannot be controlled. A population that discovers its own sacred power cannot be ruled. And a population that understands the true nature of the old gods, their autonomy, their vastness, their refusal to be tamed, would never again bow to the limited pantheons the priesthood curated. The priesthoods of Sumer left behind a chilling confession etched to a private tablet hidden for millennia beneath palace stone. The gods of before walk among the people without altar or temple. They teach without offering. They empower without oath. If they remain, the priests will have no purpose. No purpose, no authority, no power. This, more than anything, was why the forbidden pantheon had to be erased. Not for the good of humanity, not for cosmic balance, but for institutional survival. The priesthoods understood that religion is not merely belief, it is architecture, infrastructure, a mechanism of control disguised as spiritual order. And any god who bypasses that mechanism threatens the entire foundation. As civilizations evolved, the priesthoods became more sophisticated in their strategies. In Egypt, certain temples were sealed and declared forbidden sites, not because they were dangerous, but because they belonged to deities whose narratives no longer served the state. In Mesopotamia, scribes were ordered to correct older myths, rewriting entire genealogies to make the new gods appear as eternal rulers rather than recent conquerors. In Persia, the priests altered symbolic meanings, turning ancient protectors into embodiments of chaos to justify their removal. In Greece, philosophers disguised suppression as allegory, asserting that the old gods were never meant to be taken literally. In early Christianity, the Church demonized every rival divine figure as a fallen being to elevate its singular authority. The patterns are not only consistent, they are deliberate. Whenever a priesthood established dominance, the first act was not worship, it was elimination, a cleansing of the divine landscape to remove any deity that granted power directly to the people instead of through sanctioned intermediaries. But perhaps the most telling evidence comes from a set of Akkadian tablets once thought to be mundane administrative records. On one, scribes scratched out a set of names, too hastily, too forcibly, and beside the gouged clay, another hand wrote, "Erase their symbols, but not their memory. It cannot be erased." The priest who wrote those words was not defiant, he was afraid. Afraid because he knew what every priesthood eventually learns. You can silence a god, you can bury a god, you can outlaw the worship of a god, but you cannot destroy the archetype that god embodies. And the Forbidden Pantheon embodied the most uncontrollable archetype of all, liberation. The liberation of spirit, the liberation of thought, the liberation of identity, the liberation of the cosmic self from the narrow roles assigned by appointed rulers. The priesthoods knew that even if they burned every tablet and silenced every hymn, the presence of these gods would reappear whenever humanity returned to the same threshold of awakening. Because the forbidden gods are not bound to temples, they are bound to consciousness. And so the priesthoods shifted strategy. If these gods cannot be destroyed, they must be discredited. And if they cannot be discredited, they must be hidden. Across cultures, we see the same transformation. A creator becomes a monster. A teacher becomes a rebel. A liberator becomes a serpent. A cosmic architect becomes a demon. And the public, generation after generation, inherits only the distorted shadows of beings once revered as the wisest forces in creation. But in the margins of suppressed texts, in the esoteric hymns never sung outside of hidden circles, one message repeats. When the age turns and the old order breaks, they will return. Not in body, but in memory. Not in temple, but in truth. The priesthoods did not erase the forbidden gods. They delayed them. They suppressed them. They hid them behind myths designed to scare or shame. But suppression is not defeat. And what is buried in the human psyche does not remain buried forever, especially not when the world begins to crack, as it is cracking now. This is why the truth matters today, not because we seek to resurrect ancient religions, not because we worship forgotten names, but because the story we inherited is incomplete, because the divine order we were taught was manufactured, and because the power humanity lost began with the erasure of the gods who once gave it freely. And because if we are to understand the rebellion forming in the heavens and within ourselves, we must first understand the rebellion that was buried. The priesthoods hid the truth because they feared it, but fear is the weakest lock, and the lock is failing. What was hidden is stirring. What was forbidden is returning. The celestial rebellion did not end in the ancient world. It is beginning again. Part 7
The return cycle. The lost gods are not gone.
There is a misconception woven through modern myth, a comforting illusion offered to humanity by the priesthoods who inherited a rewritten sky, that gods die, that once forgotten, they fade, that once silenced, they sleep, that once erased, they're gone. But the ancients knew better. Buried beneath the ashes of collapsed temples, etched faintly into walls that crumbled under the weight of time, a single idea survives. An idea far older than the pantheons we remember. The gods do not disappear. They cycle. They withdraw. They wait. They observe. And when the age shifts, when the cosmic order loosens, they return. Not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as forces of memory too ancient to stay buried. The forbidden pantheon was never defeated. They were sealed by the new divine regime and by the priesthoods who feared their influence. But the seal was never perfect, for the oldest gods do not dwell in temples or scriptures. They dwell in archetype, in instinct, in the deep strata of the human psyche where myth and memory merge. To erase them completely would require erasing a part of humanity itself. And humanity, despite every rewrite, every suppression, every doctrinal cage, remembers, even when it does not know what it remembers. Across cultures that never met, we find the same prophecy repeated under different names, different symbols, different disguises. A time will come when the old order weakens, when the sanctioned gods grow silent, when the myths that replaced the truth begin to crack, and in that time, the old gods return. The Maya called it the reopening of the first sky. The Egyptians called it the stirring of the hidden ones. The Persians spoke of it only in whispers. When the world grows too narrow, the forgotten ones walk again. This is the return cycle, not a prophecy of doom, a prophecy of correction, a cosmic recalibration that occurs when the heavens become so heavily edited that they can no longer contain their own distortions. When the order that replaced the forbidden pantheon begins to fracture under the weight of its own architecture. When humanity, stripped of the primal wisdom the lost gods once offered, reaches a breaking point.
Consider the signs. When a civilization no longer trusts the gods it inherited, it seeks older answers. When systems of meaning begin to collapse, older symbols resurface. When myths feel thin, the psyche digs deeper. It is no coincidence that the modern world, with all its technology, all its knowledge, all its secular pride, is haunted by ancient imagery it never consciously learned. Serpents coiling through dreams, winged beings whose faces cannot be described, voices that speak not in language, but in memory. Symbols appearing instinctively in art, in architecture, in moments of crisis and transformation. Humans today dream the same symbols carved into tablets 5,000 years ago. How? Why? Because the archetypes of the forbidden pantheon are resurfacing. They return not as figures in the sky, but as forces in the mind. For the psyche is older than any scripture, older than any priesthood, older than the first rewrite that attempted to confine the divine within 12 thrones and a set of rules. The psyche remembers what history erased, and when the psyche awakens, the gods return. Every ancient culture warned that the return cycle was not a simple visitation. It was a confrontation, a moment when humanity is forced to choose, continue living within a cosmic order built on omission, or remember the fuller, vaster, more dangerous truth that the forbidden pantheon represents. A truth that expands identity beyond prescribed roles, a truth that dissolves the boundaries of sanctioned myth, a truth that restores the spiritual autonomy that civilizations long ago worked so desperately to suppress. The return of these gods is not an arrival, it is a remembering,
a remembering that destabilizes every power structure that depends on ignorance, a remembering that unsettles the heavens themselves. Because when the forbidden gods return, the gods who replace them must defend their thrones. The return cycle is the prelude to celestial conflict, not metaphorical conflict, not symbolic conflict. A rebellion older than the oldest stories, resuming the war that the first rewrite pretended to conclude. But the most profound aspect of the return cycle is not cosmic, it is personal. For the ancients believed that the forbidden gods do not return to the world first, they return to individuals, to those who sense that the version of reality they were taught is incomplete, too narrow, too domesticated for the immensity they feel inside. To those who dream symbols they should not recognize, to those who feel ancient familiarity with myths they have never read, to those who look at the sky and feel not wonder, but recognition. These people, though few, are always the first to awaken during a return cycle, not because they are chosen, but because they listen. And in the silence between their thoughts, the forbidden gods whisper, not commands, not doctrine, not fear, a question. A question older than temples, older than pantheons, older than the rewritten heavens. Do you remember who we were before the others rewrote the sky? When enough people say yes, or even dare to ask how, the return cycle begins in earnest. Because the gods do not return to the world, they return through humanity, through memory, through awakening, through the cracks in a cosmology so fragile that a single truth can shatter it. And so we arrive at the revelation that frames this entire series. The lost gods are not gone. They have simply been waiting for the age that could hear them again, waiting for the myths to thin, waiting for the order to fracture, waiting for the psyche to open, waiting for the moment when humanity is ready to reclaim the divine inheritance that was stolen. That moment is approaching. The return cycle is already unfolding, and what returns first is not a god, but the truth that made them dangerous, a truth powerful enough to topple heavens.
Part 8. The opening move of a forbidden war. The first sign that a forbidden war is beginning is not thunder in the heavens, nor the return of ancient beings descending in brilliance or shadow. It is a subtle shift, a tremor in the symbolic architecture of the world, a quiet unbinding of stories that were meant to stay sealed forever. When a myth begins to change, not because scholars revise it, but because something older is awakening beneath it, a cosmos is already moving. We are living in such a moment now. The priesthoods of old believed they had closed the gates, buried the rebels, sealed the forbidden pantheon beyond the reach of time. But the seals were designed for a world that no longer exists, a world where belief was uniform, where myth was centralized, where humanity still obeyed the celestial hierarchy that replaced the primal gods. That world has dissolved, and in the dissolution, the first cracks appear. Cracks through which memory returns, cracks through which archetype breathes, cracks through which the rightful order of the heavens, wild, ancient, untamed, begins to reassert itself. The celestial rebellion did not end. It paused, and the pause is ending. The oldest texts warn that before the forbidden gods return openly, before the boundaries break and the heavens shift, there is always a spark, a conflict between two celestial forces whose rivalry shaped the first great fracture. A war not of morality, but of philosophy, not of light versus darkness, but of freedom versus dominion. The Sumerians preserved this truth more faithfully than most, though even their tablets were edited to appear harmless. Two brothers, two powers, two visions for the fate of creation. One who sought control, one who offered liberation, one who believed the cosmos should obey, one who believed the cosmos should awaken. Enlil and Enki. Their conflict was the prototype for every divine war that echoed across civilizations. Every pantheon split into sky gods and earth gods, into rulers and rebels, into angels and fallen ones, into tyrants and teachers. All of it was a retelling of that first cosmic rupture, a rupture the priesthoods tried to soften into allegory, to disguise as family drama, to diminish into folklore. But behind the softened myth lies the original truth. The war between Enlil and Enki was the opening move of the Celestial Rebellion, a war over humanity, a war over knowledge, a war over who had the right to shape the destiny of consciousness itself. And that war is not over. It is resurfacing in the return cycle we now inhabit. As the forbidden gods stir, as humanity begins to remember what was taken, as the boundaries of myth grow thin as paper, the ancient conflict reawakens. Not in temples, not on sacred mountains, but in the psyche of every person who feels the pull of two opposite forces. One that urges obedience, one that whispers autonomy, one that promises safety, one that offers truth, one that demands you remain small, one that reminds you that you were never meant to be small at all. This tension is the surest sign that the war behind the erasure is rising again. And as with every age before, it will begin with the same two powers whose rivalry once split the heavens. To understand the rebellion, we must return to its first spark, to the moment when the cosmic order fractured, to the clash that determined the fate of gods and humans alike, to the brothers who became adversaries, not by hatred, but by vision, the keeper of order and the giver of forbidden knowledge, Enlil and Enki. As we end this episode, the sky grows quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. And in that silence, if you listen carefully, you may sense the faint vibration of something ancient shifting in the deep. Not approaching, returning. Returning because the world has forgotten too much, because the rewritten heavens can no longer contain the truths they buried, because the rebellion that began before history is preparing its next move. The next chapter of this forbidden war awaits you. The gods erased from myth are stepping back into the story, and the first to rise are the brothers who split the heavens, Enlil and Enki. The first war of heaven begins now. If this chapter stirred something ancient in you, if the forgotten symbols feel familiar, if the sky seems different now, stay with us. In the next episode, we descend into the oldest conflict ever recorded and the one the priesthoods tried hard